A reading from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But you are not in the flesh. On the contrary, you are in the Spirit. If only the Spirit of God dwells in you. Whoever does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. But if Christ is in you, although the body is dead to sin, the Spirit is alive because of righteousness. If the Spirit of the one who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, the one who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also, through the Spirit dwelling in you. A guy was walking along the road, and he falls into a deep hole. Try as he might, he can't climb out of the hole. It's just too deep. But within a couple of minutes, a businessman walks along and he says, "Hey, excuse me, mister, could you help me out?" The businessman takes the wallet out of his pocket, takes some cash out of his wallet, throws it into the hole, and then walks on by. Soon a doctor comes along and the guy says, "Hey, doc, do you think you could help me out?" The doctor writes a prescription, throws it into the hole, and walks away. But soon a friend walks by and the guy says, "Hey, Josh, do you think you could help me out?" Without a moment's hesitation, his friend jumps into the hole. The guy looks at him and says, "What are you, crazy? Now we're both in this hole." And his friend looks him in the eye and says, "Yeah, we are. But I've been where you are, and I know the way out." This morning, St. Paul delivered one of those great "be not afraid" moments. Born of the Virgin Mary, fully human and fully divine, Jesus has lived among us and walked among us. Jesus Christ has been where we are. He's our friend, and he abides with us in our mess and in our messy lives. In his letter, St. Paul reminds us that those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Eating, drinking, other tawdry excess can be examples of being flesh-centered, but so can be living in fear, being frozen in fear of the illness we see in our world today. We cannot live our lives in fear. Just as we call him to accompany those who have been affected by this deadly virus, he too calls us to accompany them in our prayers and in whatever we can to be of service. Our church is rich with a history of saints and others who risked their lives and livelihood despite the cost. Saints who cared for the diseased and the dying. Saints like Francis, Catherine of Siena, Mother Cabrini, Cosmas and Damian, Mother Teresa, Molokai, Martin de Porres. The list goes on and on. Some, like Father Damien and Marian Cope of Molokai, spent years caring for the physical, spiritual, and emotional needs of lepers in a colony. They knew the risk involved in treating the sick, but they didn't shrink in fear. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to throw all caution to the wind. Exposing yourself to unnecessary risk doesn't satisfy the moral good. And some of us have responsibilities to family and our community. They rely on us. St. Damien got sick. He didn't turn away from others. He's what the church calls a martyr for charity. But St. Marian Cope, she lived till she was 80. She and her sisters understood the importance of good hygiene. Wash your hands, say your prayers, and whatever you do, stop touching your face. Following the advice of experts is called prudence. But we must continue to remind ourselves we cannot live our lives in fear. Our fear tells us to hoard toilet paper and hand sanitizer. Our fear tells us to binge watch the 24-hour news cycle. Our fear tells us to avoid eye contact while we're in the supermarket because we might accidentally breathe the same air as somebody else. We spend our time worrying about what ifs And when we do that, there's no time remaining for hope. The message is simple. We must live in the Spirit. God loved us enough to give his Son for us. He will not abandon us now when we're in our time of trial. Our community, our nation, our world are in a hole right now. A hole not much different from the one I spoke about before. But Jesus is our friend, and he's in the hole with us already. He always has been. He never left. Because he's crazy in love with each and every one of us. God promises that he will be with us. He only asks that we put our trust in him and put aside our fear. Trust in God, the God who created us, who loves us completely. Trust him to accompany us in our mess. He's been where we are, and he knows the way out. He is the way.